Hi, and thanks for watching another instructional video for CSCI 1300. In this video, we will take a little bit deeper look at the functions that we are declaring in our public section in our bank account example class. So we have two different sections here. One for constructors, which we've talked about briefly, but we're going to talk about a little bit more. And then we have another set of variables that have to do with some kind of an operation on this particular set of objects or object. So let's talk about what these could possibly do. So there are two different ways of describing functions that are not the constructors in a class. And I'm just going to leave a line here saying that this is the constructors. We have this is our default, and the next one is our overloaded constructor, or parameterized. It's another way of saying it because it takes in parameters. And now we have this is our functions related to getting or setting information. So we're going to call these accessors or mutators. So what does that mean? To access something means to get something, right? So we want to return something. If we want to mutate, what we want to do is we want to access and then update. So say we have a balance and we want to update that balance. Well, we can do that. So for instance, say we wanted to get the balance. Well, this would be an accessor because all we do is we return what is there, what is already there. Add interest, well, this is going to be a mutator, and so will withdraw, and so will deposit. So all of these can change the account in some way. It can change the balance of the account in a positive or a negative direction by some factor. The withdraw being like probably the highest factor, the add interest would probably be a low factor. The deposit could be positive as well by some really big factor or some really small factor. The balance is really just going to return whatever is there. So that's why we're accessing, but we're not mutating. We're just returning what is there. So let's leave it like this, where basically we're going to set these up into two different categories or three different categories. We've got our constructors, we've got our mutators, and we have our accessor here at the bottom. So now we've broken this up and we kind of think about why do we actually need to pass in values? Well, say we create an object for the first time, we would have to use a default constructor unless we had a specific balance that we wanted to add to the object when we create the object for the first time. So if we didn't specify the balance, what we could do is we could create the object by calling the default constructor, then use the deposit operation on this new blank object and just deposit whatever we want. And that would be the same as doing this function call, the parameterized constructor, in two steps. We'd have to declare a new object and then deposit some initial balance. What the parameterized constructor does is it allows us to put in some initial balance into the bank account without having to call with deposit on a blank object. It just does, it sets it as we go. So this brings us to another question, which is we probably need to think about what is our private variable, right? Well, if we want to use any of these functions, either update information, store information, withdraw information, things like that, we need to have something stored in the object. And this is where I would actually declare what is going to be stored in the object. So this is where the balance resides. So whenever we access this object, we're accessing things inside of it in the private section. So say we wanted to deposit, we would be modifying balance. If we were to use withdraw, we'd be modifying the balance variable. And if we had multiple variables, then we would have multiple functions to access those variables as well. Usually for every variable that you have, you're going to have an accessor and a mutator associated with it. Okay, so now that we've talked about the constructors, let's talk about the mutators and the accessors. So if we do an accessor, notice that the accessor has a return type. It has a data type associated with the function and no parameters. What this means is that we don't need to pass in some new information. We just need to return the information that is currently stored within the private variable that this is associated with. So we can see here that it's called getBalance. It's got a double on it. We basically want to return whatever is in the variable balance that is also double. With the mutators, what we're doing is we're doing kind of the opposite. Notice that we have a void function here, which means we're not returning any information. However, we can do an update if we take whatever is in balance and add to it by some new amount. So we pass in some information here, and we use that to update the balance variable in the private section. So this is the incoming information that will modify the stored private information. If we were to withdraw, same thing occurs here. We have some value we want to withdraw, so we access balance and then reduce it by some amount that we have passed in through the withdraw function. We request that amount here, whether it's a deposit or a withdrawal amount, through what we pass through the deposit or withdraw functions. Now say we wanted to add the interest. Well, the same thing occurs here. What we could do is we could add a rate, some amount that we want to change the balance by in add interest. And maybe we have a calculation that gives us something based on the rate, and then we add that in as interest to the balance. So both deposit and interest will add to our account, and withdraw will reduce or take away from the total balance. So in this video, we've really talked about how to really break down these functions and figure out why we use them and why we have private and public differences. The main reason we use private information is so that we can store it without any person accessing the information that we are trying to store. So in order to grab or access that information or modify it, mutate it, we need to have a function associated with that operation. So the functions will do the operations on the object at some variable that's stored within it. And that is the only way that we can access the information stored in the object. So that's all for now. Thanks and happy coding.